everybody. I'm here with my buddy Skip Knowles, Frank and Frank. He's a Frank Knowles too. I've known Skip going back to our Salt Lake Tribune days. We worked at Salt Lake Tribune, biggest newspaper in Utah. We covered the Olympic Games. Skip is a really good writer. He's been doing this 20 plus years professionally. He's made a living doing it in a profession. Very hard to be a professional writer. A lot of writers out there, very few can make a living for 20 years. An outdoorsman who's traveled the world. He's traveled Africa, pretty much almost every continent. Patagonia, he's done some, and I'll let him tell you that. Some very premier hunting, some very expensive trips. He's an example of somebody I always say to Skip. There's the skipper right there. He is, and apologize for not having the great camera work, but Skip has been, when you measure success, you measure it different ways. You can just look at somebody who's made a lot of money and say, oh, they're successful. But then you have someone like Skip who was born, this guy was born to do what he does. And how do you put a price tag on someone that's doing exactly what they were born to do, loves it, travels the world. He's got 4 kids, he's got a beautiful wife in Colorado. He lives right beside a river, pretty much in pristine land. So without further ado, my buddy Skip Knowles right there. So Skipper, tell us, you've went on a lot of hunting adventures. What are some of the hunting adventures that stand out that you've done? What places in the world have you been, and what adventures stand out?
I appreciate you saying such generous things, but basically he's saying I've managed to avoid a real job my whole life. And it's true, when you're doing what you love, it never feels like work. But I don't know, man. The hunting adventures are top-notch, but the surfing and living in Costa Rica and some of the other things I got to do with the luxury magazines, traveling to Indonesia and surfing and opening golf courses were just as good. The hunting adventures are just more intense because there's some stuff on the line. I'll never forget being at the top of the Alaska range, chasing Dall sheep, camping in these tents that don't look like tents. They're just like hovels over the ground in the middle of blasting wind. When you go camping, even backcountry big game hunting, you're always trying to find a spot to get out of the wind in the trees or whatever. Up there you can't. You're just on a ridge in the wind. You can't even light a fire or anything, and it's a trip. And I'm glad I got a big Dall sheep within a few days because I was ready to get out of there. But if you're hiking up to 20 miles a day, and there's no trails. You're just hiking over rocks like an insect with sticks. It's just so intense. That's an unforgettable one.
And how much baggage do you have and all that stuff? You're hiking 20 miles, but with how much baggage and how heavy can your accessories get?
I think we managed to hike in, make ourselves a little base camp, and day to day we were hiking around with about 30, 40 pounds. But when we killed that sheep and took all the meat and everything out, I had a 75-pound pack and a gun and everything, and that crazy guide friend of mine, he had a 115-pound pack and was going over rocks just like nothing, just like a mountain goat.
115 pounds on it?
Oh yeah. I can't believe he has any needs.
What nationality was he? What is he?
He's a big old strong white boy. I can't remember where he's from. I think the Midwest originally. But the crazy men up there, man, it's just nuts. I had the misfortune of catching a 25-year-old guide who was at the end of his season. So that means he's in the best shape of his life because he's been doing it nonstop. And I jump in then, and I'm damn near twice his age, It was a trip, but it was a challenge that I loved so much. It was really something else.
Now, everybody thinks, that
guy, sorry to interrupt, but talk about how crazy the people are up there, how rugged. That guy had been in 7 plane crashes. Just bush planes crash all the time. And most of his injuries were not from the extreme hunting and everything. They were from all the plane wrecks that are just part of way of life up there. It's nuts.
Now, when you go hunting, and I've talked to different hunters, it's not just the sport aspect of it. There's a whole zen, there's a peace of mind, there's a whole connection with nature. Talk about that, because people don't really think of that in a lot of ways. What are some of the different moods or mindsets you have when you're out there? Because like you said, 20 miles, there's a whole, you're not in the heat of some chase or hunt all the time, so you've got time to think, you've got time to let your mind wander. What kind of things occur to you, or is there zen out there? What's going on when you're out there?
Some things are completely unpleasant, like being in a duck blind and driving sleet and rain, or sitting on a blind in warm weather and you're swarmed by mosquitoes, and there's no way to make that romantic. That's just a crappy endurance contest. But on most of the good trips, there's these different things where your mind completely bends. Like on that Dall sheep hunt, we saw the northern lights like I'd never seen on that ridge top over in the Alaska range. I felt like we were right up in them, and they're coming out of the ground. And you know, so few non-hunters ever see that in a situation like that. They might see it from a comfortable place down below, but not from a mountaintop like that. Or elk hunting in the woods. There'll be in the quaking aspen in late September, there'll be a puff of wind, and a million little golden silver dollar leaves from the aspens fall down all around you. And you hear the scream of a big bull up. And it's just an incredibly stirring feeling that there's just nothing like it. Every different kind of hunt you go on, you have that experience. The Cape Buffalo hunt in Africa, we had a giant herd feed right in on us. It looked like the orc army, just shiny black horns and these grunting, bellowing, giant black beasts. And my PH was so confident, he let them get just crazy close, like I mean 15 feet away. And there's mothers with calves there, and you know that's trouble, but he was so experienced, he doped the wind and knew that when they'd smell us, they'd move off without charging right away. We chased that herd, trying to find a big bull, and right before we got close enough to the herd to do anything, we hear this, ooh! And I look up, and here's this giant lioness standing there 40 yards away, and she's making a decision about whether she's gonna run or not. That was the freakiest thing. That was the first lion I saw in the wild. And then two more jump out in front of us like 20 yards away. And you know, you've got these powerful rifles, but they only have like 3 bullets. And suddenly I forgot all about the buffalo, because there were some older, much better hunters there, you know, who led us. And it gets worse. We try and back out. The PH says, we must leave, there will be an accident. And we back out and bump right into a giant water buffalo, Cape buffalo, that the lions had just killed. He goes, oh no, this is not good. We must leave. There will be an accident. I promise you, they're looking at us through the grass. They never leave their prey. They are looking at us. They are making a decision. We must go. And that kind of thing, you know, it's in Africa, it's a lot of scary experiences. And you know, that's an adrenaline rush. People don't often get hurt, but it constantly feels like you're going to, so.
Yeah, I always wonder, like, what are some of the dangers, and some dangers might be foreseen and some might be unforeseen, but you've been doing this a long time. What are the other adventures that stand out where there was danger? It could be just weather, it could be a slip or a slide, or hard to get your footing somewhere high up. What else stands out in terms of the peril and the danger you can face out there?
Oh, it's animals. In Africa, one time I was holding onto the back of a Jeep, and a giant black mamba. I heard a rustling, and you always hear rustling as the small animals running away. I looked over to see what kind of little antelope or rabbit it was, and it was this giant black mamba. His head was suspended like 4 feet in the air right beside me. They're a member of the cobra family, and famously aggressive, but he's backing away. And I got sick in camp later, horrible stomach flu, and one of the doctors helped, one of the hunters, the PH hunters, pulled out a huge medical kit. I'm like, you're like a bush doctor, and he gave me some pills and cleared it right up. I said, that's amazing. Wow, what do you do out here when someone does get, it's amazing that you helped me so quickly. I said, what do you do out here when someone does get bitten by a mamba or a puff adder? Some of our guys almost stepped on this puff adder, deadly snake, right in camp. He goes, well, you must move them immediately to the shade. And I said, oh, that makes sense, because the African heat is the sun is so violent, it'll help them stabilize. He goes, no, because a corpse starts to stink so badly in the sun. But other adventures, it's getting lost. Even like just a 12-year-old boy, I got caught in a rainstorm way too far deep into a flooded swamp in Georgia, and we could never find our way out, and it was terrifying. And we finally heard our family firing guns to come get us. And generally it's exposure in the Rockies, you know, getting out there too far. I got caught in a snowstorm in Utah on my last hunt there, August 17th. And everyone was wearing cotton. That's a hot time of year. A giant weird snow lightning storm hit and just froze all the bow hunters right out of the hills.
In August?
August 17th. Hottest time in the country in many places. So that's the kind of thing. I know you've been through a lot of strange perils, from crazy maniacs with baseball bats to just a challenging life. I mean,
yeah, we won't talk about that. That's all been good for the soul. That's been you know, fuel for the soul. But so the other interesting thing, and I think so, Skip is, we're not going to talk about necessarily Skip's age. You know, I'm pretty out there with my age, but this guy looks definitely a lot younger, probably 12, 15 years younger than he is. I mean, he ate a lot of pizza last night, so he's got salt face. But you know, you're easily gonna guess 12, sometimes 15 years younger for this guy. We talk a lot about, you know, youthful exuberance and being playful. I've seen Skip with his kids. He's a father of 4. I've seen him how playful he is. So let's talk about staying young. I mean, you're outdoors. That helps. Doing what you love to do, because you're just one of those people that seems like, and a lot of people lose that. They just lose that. Life beats them up. Life busts them in the mouth, and then they just walk around and they're just, you know, at best they're neutral. They're kind of zombied out, but you're not afraid to be like a big kid, and I love that about you, and I've got that too. Talk about how do you stay a bit, I mean, you play for a living anyway, so I guess that helps.
That helps. It's funny for you to be so kind and say that stuff after a week on the Vegas Strip. I feel pretty haggard, but a lot of it is genetics. I have a freak mom who's she's almost 80 now. She looks like she's in her mid-60s, and she's always been that way. So that does play into it somewhat. I got lucky there, but I don't know. I think it's either in you or it's not. But like, some friends of mine teased me when I posted a photo of me snowboarding in New Zealand last year. I said they're looking at me because I'm forced to wear this duck hunting outfit, this duck hunting camo, because that's all I had, because that was the safari we were on. I just happened to detour and get lucky and catch the first big snowstorm of the year outside of Christchurch. Rented a Burton, charged up the hill. And I think that's an example, just having that attitude. Most people who are around my age, almost 50, wouldn't be like, I can rent a board and I can go rip, you know? And then my friends saw it online or said, maybe they're not looking at the outfit. Maybe it's because you're almost 50 and you're on a snowboard. And I'm like, wow, really? It never even occurred to me that I was anywhere near, you know, stopping snowboarding. That might be odd. So it's all attitude, you know. With me, it's arrested development, you know, juvenile delinquent tendencies, I guess. I don't know. But
now Skip has...
There's something to be said for immaturity, Frank.
Yeah, that's right.
Spontaneity.
And it's interesting, we were talking about this earlier. We were having breakfast here in Vegas. Skip's going back to Colorado today, but we were talking, I was like, you know, happy people are just harder to kill, right? And Skip's a happy guy, a high vibration guy. Also, you're eating, let's talk about that for a second, because Skip was telling me yesterday that about 90% or so of the meat that he eats is, I mean, you're talking about this is wild caught meat out there, pristine meat. Talk about that, because I don't trust the Forza fit in me doesn't trust a lot of the meat. To me, that's the biggest problem with meat, is people are averaging 10 ounces of meat a day, and then they're eating meat that is crap, processed, chemicals, antibiotics, hormones, whatever. This Skip's got a whole different story and a whole different take on that. You're eating some of the most pristine meat out there.
We talked about the excitement of being a hunter and the challenge of some of the hunts can have, but man, every time you ground check 200 pounds of organic protein, it's just as exciting as getting something with big antlers. I love the challenge of trying to get a mature animal and all that, because they're 10 times harder to find. But really, when you get your hands on an animal and skin it, you just thank God in that moment for that meat. We were just in this store, this Whole Foods, which turns out to be he's talking about them all the time. They don't have one where I live. Turns out to be way cooler than I thought. They have a pizza and beer joint inside. But we found a package of hamburger, and it didn't even say it was organic. And it was about 2 pounds, it's about that big. And it's wrapped in plastic and styrofoam, and they're claiming it's healthy or maybe grass-fed, and you don't really know where that came from. And it was about 2 pounds, it was $22. I kill an elk, and we get one every year. I'm going next week to get a cow elk, and you get 300 pounds of boned out meat, and I'll fire up the grinder and make 50 pounds of that stuff. And it's way better than the hamburger you buy here for $22 for that amount. What's that worth? I can't do the math. But it's so satisfying. And I make, my kids get a little picky about eating meat when they're really young, and I'll make snow goose jerky, wild turkey jerky, and tons of venison, and what my 3-year-old calls beef gorky, elk jerky, and you gotta hide it from them, man. We had one bag fall in the back of the fridge and mold over with like the blueberries and everything. I put it to the side, hid it for dog treats. My 2.5-year-old finds it. I walk out of my office and she's eating the whole thing, and she ate it. And I thought, oh no, Mom's gonna kill me. I'm waiting for her to throw up. She never even got sick. She ate about 2 pounds of moldy jerky. That shows you that healthier food. I can eat just a little airport food. I ate some airport pot stickers on the way here. Got sick as hell. Who knows what was in them, you know? But my daughter can eat 2 pounds of moldy jerky and she's fine. And they just love it. And one of the most satisfying parts of hunting for sure. Besides saving tons of money, I know they're getting the good stuff.
Now, let's shift gears for a second to creativity, because you've got here between Skip and I, you're probably looking at a half century plus of professional writing, journalism experience. Skip has been, in the newspaper business. He's run magazines. He's just on the front lines. He's a real journalist, been able to put food on the table for years and years and years in a profession filled with uncertainty, filled with instability. A lot of journalists running scared. This guy has been able to do it, and he's a very good writer. So let's talk a little bit about the creative process, because you've been able, you're prolific. You produce a lot of copy. You're working on a magazine now how much copy are you putting out for this magazine that you're working on now? You're talking about that.
Oh man, we're just launching a new one called North American Elk. There's nothing out there like it, dedicated just to elk hunting, because they're so aspirational, an animal. That has 109 pages of editorial.
And that's all you?
Oh no, I don't do it.
Okay.
I want to buy a magazine with just me. I did one 10-page story and another 3-page feature, but I put it all together, and there's 10 different writers in there, huge features. I think the only thing I could say to that, Frank, it's really nice to have. Writing to me has always been like falling out of a boat, easy, and that's nice. But the real thing is to stick. I think it was Hemingway. I can't remember for sure, but he said stick with what you know. And sometimes in life you get in a situation where I have to go. I once wrote, I don't even like basketball, and I went and had to write a big NBA pamphlet because I needed the money, and I felt like a fish out of water the whole time and unconfident. So as a journalist, that's easy to handle. You just turn to the experts and let them do the work for you. But in my day-to-day, why I've been so lucky, I think, is you're overly generous to say I've been that successful. I've had a lot of luck, attitude, and timing. Stick with what you know. Whenever I write a hunting or fishing or snowboarding piece, I do so or mountain biking, I do it with extreme confidence because I know what I'm talking about. Like Frank, Mr. Forza writing about health, fitness, and fighting, and overcoming hardship. They're things that are very familiar and that you're strong on. You could talk about that. Have you ever had to write about anything, Frank, that you weren't really totally comfortable on?
Yeah, so Skip made a couple of really good points. He said, stick with what you know. I'm with that too. I say basically, what were you born to do? Look inside your soul. What sets you on fire? What will you jump out of bed? Dana White. What will make you jump out of bed in the morning? That's great advice. But then he also said something interesting, which is a really good journalist. You can get thrown. Maybe when I was in the newsrooms, I remember I would have to cover obituaries. I could say, or somebody, McCarran International, there was, all the flights were grounded, and I'd say, oh, well, I'm not the business guy, right? What am I doing going to McCarran International writing a business story? No such thing. You had to be ready to wear any hat. You're writing an obituary. You're not just the sports guy. You're not just the cops and courts guy. And so that's when, you can't write as authoritatively when you don't know. So you can be, a lot of the creativity and the inventive stuff and the innovative stuff, that's where Skip's talking about, hey, when you know it like the back of your hand, you've lived it, you didn't just read it. You can write with such authority and such creativity and such license. When you're thrown to the wolves, it's like, oh, I don't know much about this. Then you're just going to get, hey, find the experts, just nuts and bolts reporting. And so you have to realize, but to me, I don't really want to do that nuts and bolts reporting my whole life. I like to find a niche and say, I know I can sit here in my chair and I don't need, even if the experts disappear and they didn't tell me, can I make sense of this? Can I entertain? Can I inform? Can I educate a readership? And that's really when you're going higher up the chain. And so the thing about Skip, how much copy do you think you write? How many words do you think you write in a range of words you write in each week?
I think it was Mark Twain or I'm being bad with the quotes today after a week in Vegas, but somebody said, I'm sorry, I don't have time to write you a short letter. And so I feel like volume of words is a really bad thing to measure things by anyway. I probably write 12 major feature stories and 15 big editor letters a year, but I also write cover lines and all this stuff. But the most important takeaway, I've taught a ton of people to write more concisely and with more impact. And the number one thing, so there's 90% more writers now than there were 20 years ago because everyone's got diarrhea of the
and 90%
fingers.
Bad writing, really
90%
bad writing too.
And that difference, Frank, that's a very good point. The difference between the 10% and the other 90%, the people who they really grab the reader right away. The number one thing that I teach people is don't take the reader for granted. People tend to write the way they like to sit in a bar and talk. They want people to hear them. They kind of want to talk over other people. It's human nature. I want to be heard. But as a writer who's writing something that other people want to read, you just step outside yourself and go, okay, who's my audience? Don't take the audience for granted. Don't dive in with your self-divulgent BS about I, me. Only use the first person when it's absolutely unavoidable, because that's when you're supposed to. That's when it has impact. And don't take the reader for granted. Get it up top right away why they should be reading this. Don't just hope they'll keep reading, waiting to figure it out. You got to hit them with the why they should be reading this, why their life is not complete if they don't read this story right away. Don't take the audience for granted. That's the first thing. Second thing is know the audience. Who is the audience? If you understand who the audience is, then you've won half the battle. If you could take the ego aside long enough to consider the audience, not yourself, and don't take them for granted, you will be successful in writing, and be descriptive.
Yeah, it's interesting because Skip and I were walking around Vegas last night, and I was saying, I had the pleasure of working a number of years with Dana White, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, a company that did the impossible, went from $2 million to flatline on its deathbed to a $5 billion company and probably counting. And I remember people, for me, when I think of what was Dana White's real skill, his real skills, he has a force of personality. You can't not watch him. He's just a compelling personality. He's entertaining whether you like him or you don't. And the other thing was, no one ever talks about this, but Dana White knows his audience. He knows what the fight fan wants, and he holds the fighters' feet to the fire to say, this is what they want, this is what you must give them. And that is a secret sauce, easier said than done, but he knows what they want. And Skip was just saying, know thy audience. Whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a writer, that's really important. And I would say too, with the interesting thing with the creativity, Skip, is like, when you're doing this as long as Skip Knowles has been doing it, or as long as I've been doing it, you one of the challenges is, how do I say something new? Because you feel like, man, I've said it all. I've said this. I'm covering outdoor stuff. I'm covering snowboarding. I'm covering this elk hunt. How do you constantly challenge yourself so that it doesn't get monotonous for you, not just the reader, but you say, how do I do this in a way that it doesn't get boring? And how do I this
is an easy one.
Constantly raise the bar.
This is an easy one. What I learned in covering the Olympics is you could have the most incredibly exciting race where it comes right down to the wire, and it has all the elements of an incredible ski or bobsled or luge competition, and it's so dramatic, and the finish is within a 100th of a second, and you write the story and it's kind of flat. You're like, it's still somehow not that exciting. What I learned is people are interested in people. If you got to put a human face on everything. Even if it's a story about duck hunting, it's a story about a fight, whose dreams were reached that day and whose dreams died, or who got a leg up. You got to put a human face on things. Man, if you do that in your writing, you are home free. It's like, who trained their whole lives to get to this great moment and got one further step away from it, or God forbid crashed in a race or whatever, and you make them understand where that person's coming from, where their hopes were, and how they lived or died that day. Suddenly you could take a lame ass story that would be boring about a race that wasn't that good, and we are all forced to do that when you're writing that kind of thing. But you put a human face on it, and suddenly people are interested.
Yeah, we talk a lot about. I talk a lot about living it is greater than reading it. Now, Skip is an avid reader. You had a lot of books. I mean, I've been to your house, many times in Utah. This guy's got a lot of books. How much of your writing and journalism is what you read, and how much of it is just the experience and being out there in the trenches? To become a really good journalist, really good writer, how much of it is something you can read, and how much of it is something you have to live, you have to experience?
I learned later on to put it in it's ambiguous still, but it's a clearer way of talking about it, to write in a showing voice, not a telling voice. And you could sometimes read things that should be really exciting, like a bear attacking someone or something, and it's still kind of flat. It's because the writer is telling you what happened. And then the bear charged downhill, and apparently, blah, blah, blah. Instead of really being descriptive and showing you what happened, describing the terrain, the dirt, the claw marks vividly, not saying the victim was mauled, but saying the claw marks across his face look like this. Showing voice, not telling voice. And some guy named Frank Forza, many years ago, we were standing by the bobsled track before I really learned about the showing voice versus the telling voice, which really clarifies it. He said, man, just be the lens, man. I said, be the lens? He goes, yeah, like the camera lens, man. You got to show them what's there. And that stuck with me. And compliments to you, Frank, after all these 2 decades of running around together, I still remember that. Be the lens. Later it evolved to use a showing voice, not a telling voice, but it's true. Even you see so many people taking photos, and you can tell by the photo they just looked, framed the subject, and went click. But if you really look through the lens and analyze it and go, okay, is there shadow all over this guy's face? This is a boring angle, let's get an exciting angle. And if you really look, that's like the showing voice and being the lens in writing. It's all the difference between good and bad. And you can I could write about an ant crawling across this sidewalk in a really descriptive fashion, and it could be more interesting than, a car exploding on the freeway if it's a showing voice versus a telling voice. Hats off to you, Forza, for your lens metaphor. It might have taken me a while to get it, but I got it, and it's working for me.
Well, it's interesting because I call that the Seinfeld sixth sense, which is if you have the really good writers, they're kind of philosophers, they're able to go in and they can see the little details other people miss, and you have to have that. I remember there was a woman, and we almost got to wrap up here about 5 minutes. Skip's got a flight to get, but I was watching like CNN or Fox News, and they had this body language expert on there, the lady, 45, 50-year-old woman, and I think she's like close to 50-ish, right? And so I'm like, she's a body language expert, and she's been a body language expert for like 25 years. And so I'm like, that who was into body language expert like 25, 30 years ago? Who was interested in that? And so I went and researched her online on Wikipedia and Google, like, how did this woman get her start? And she said that as a kid she was reading a lot of books, and she was always captivated by the writers. The really good writers were giving such great descriptions of body language, and it wasn't just the quotes and the what they were saying. The writers that she liked were very descriptive with body language, and that piqued her interest. She was like almost like, okay, like the body, they were such masters of describing even body language, right, to support the story. And I thought, wow, like, so just having that what I call the Seinfeld sixth sense, where Seinfeld famously said they went to NBC to pitch the pilot, and they're like, well, what is Seinfeld about? And he's like, well, it's a show about nothing, right? It's famously, it's a show about nothing, but nothing is everything. They could take the most nothing thing and make it everything.
Talk about body language, dude. That's one of the main reasons I love hanging out with this guy. If you tied Frank's hands, he could not talk to you. He could say nothing. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm
You're
back.
just as bad. I think you've got the Greek in you. The Greek and the Italian blood are like a molecule apart.
Okay, stay with me on camera here. So, I want to know what is the secret in body language to the Carreri strut. He's still got that Baltimore strut. He's wildly successful. He's no longer a boy in the hood, and he said you had to show your confidence in the hood. I got to hear more about that. But this is Frank walking around Whole Foods today with that.
I don't know about that.
Okay, it's a little hyperbole, but
I don't know about that swag.
What's the secret to the strut, Frank?
I don't know if that's a good imitation of the Forza swag.
Oh, you want me to hold it while you do it?
The hands, yeah. I've noticed it on ESPN and all this. Everybody's trying to talk with their hands now. It's amazing. People are taking acting classes on how to do what the naturals. By the way, I want to say one final thing. So I always say this. A lot of the people out there that are calling themselves experts, all they are people who study. High-level people. It's people like me who talk with their hands. They study us, and then they try to teach the other 99% who can't figure it out themselves. Most of the books out there are written for the 99% who won't figure it out. But then the Jedis are doing it just natural, and then they're like, let's find the Jedis and let's dumb it down and systematize it so we can teach the other 99% who won't figure it out how to do it.
Yeah, you watch those young sports announcers and stuff. They've obviously been coached to look like they're trying to fly away while they're trying to talk to you. And
it looks so unnatural. It's distracting.
Oh, it's awful. I have ADD anyway, so the motion gets me.
Yes.
Like the shaky camera, CSI, that makes me sick. I get motion sickness watching those guys try and talk. So you totally ducked the question on the what's the secret to the strut? I ruined the strut. I get that. That wasn't it. But I don't have it. So
the secret of the strut is when you're the white boy walking around inner city Baltimore, predominantly black. A lot of people were looking out for me. Some people, noticed I was different. And when you're that, you just kind of pick up And then when you're a little Italian American too, you just kind of pick up a little bop, a little George Jefferson. If you remember the old Jefferson show, you pick up a little of that, and I don't know. That seems in the inner cities, that seems to ward off people a little bit. If you have just the right amount of strut or peacocking to use an outdoorsman metaphor, but you just needed a little of that in inner city Baltimore to make do. If you bop too hard, you're going to have trouble. You gotta have the perfect balance of bopping, because if you bop too hard, you're going to make trouble. If you don't bop enough, you might have trouble. You got to find just the right amount of bop to keep everybody like neutral and like, hey, walk on your